This video is sponsored by Heroes of History. After World War II, the world was exposed to the horrors of the concentration camps and death camps, which took lives of millions of people, which shocked the world and started the first ever international war crimes trials to punish those responsible. Nazi policy saw the eradication of various groups, such as 6 million Jews, 4.5 million Soviet citizens, 3.5 million Soviet prisoners of war, 1.8 million Poles, over 300,000 Serbs, and about 1.5 million Romani. But there were a series of events before the war involving American companies and persons who established business relationships with German firms, essentially doing business that assisted the Axis war effort and the annihilation of entire populations. What were the connections between American and other companies and the Germans during the war? Which companies and persons were involved? Were these considered treasonous activities by the U.S. government? Were they directly involved in the Holocaust? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Many American companies were deeply involved with Germany before and during the war, which were clear violations and even treason. Before the war, many American companies such as Ford Motor Company, which had $17.5 million in 1941 monetary value invested in Germany, General Motors had $120 million, and Coca-Cola had about the same, and were all operating in Germany well into the war using both paid skilled and slave labor during World War II. See our videos on all three of those companies and their connections to Nazi Germany. Standard Oil, the creation of billionaire John D. Rockefeller Sr., had $120 million invested in Germany, and he was selling American oil and refined gasoline to Germany, which was crucial to the Allied war effort, through their New Jersey office, using neutral Switzerland as the middleman for great profits. Besides Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller had cornered the pharmaceutical and chemical industries in the United States and much of the world, especially in Europe, and in 1939 he was in full partnership with I.G. Farben, Bayer, and other German companies later involved in the Holocaust. He was a personal investor in the company which manufactured and delivered Zyklon B. Chase National Bank and Morgan Bank openly operated in Paris, France, conducting business with Germany even after the war began against the Axis powers, making billions in deals. They managed cash and gold transfers as the middlemen to Swiss bank accounts, much of the wealth stolen from European Jews, which helped fund Germany's war effort. Hitler even gave them both freedom from seizure for their being allowed by Washington to continue doing business even while at war with the United States. International Telephone and Telegraph had $30 million invested and assisted Germany's communication systems, and in fact helped develop the radio and gyroscopic guidance systems for Hitler's V-2 rockets and the Fritz X radio-controlled flying bombs. They also worked with the Japanese on projects until the end of the war in 1945. The special privilege given to ITT was due to the fact that the Gestapo chief in Paris, Walter Schellenberg, was a major stockholder in ITT, and he maintained protection for that company and others. Schellenberg also protected the American interest and investments in the Chanel perfume and clothing brand, since Coco Chanel was his mistress, and she was complicit in turning in her Jewish business partners and stealing their assets. See our video on Coco Chanel. Now, before we move ahead, I want to just take a quick moment to thank our sponsor, Heroes of History. I don't typically play games on my phone or computer, but I've got to tell you, I genuinely enjoyed this one. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. I'll also pin it in the comments for easy access. Heroes of History is a free-to-play game that combines city building and strategy with hero collection. It's like playing a game of chess, except your pieces are legendary historical and mythological figures like Caesar, Hercules, and even Tesla and Einstein. It's smart, challenging, and it actually makes you think. I was especially surprised by something called the Hero Portal. This is where you randomly summon heroes. The game is actually deep. You don't just collect these heroes, you strategically build your city from alliances or compete against others. And they update it regularly with new events, minigames, and characters, so it stays interesting. Give Heroes of History a try. It's completely free. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Again, I'll also pin it in the comments for easy access. And thanks again to Heroes of History for supporting today's episode. Another company doing business in Germany was International Business Machines, or IBM, which before the war had operated subsidiaries utilizing their punch card technology. That data, generated by means of counting and alphabetization of equipment supplied by IBM, was instrumental in the census counts and cataloging of personal information. In fact, IBM punch cards were used by the Coca-Cola company in Germany during the war. See our video on that. This assisted in targeting Jews and others across Europe. Wannsee Business Machines, the Polish IBM subsidiary, set up operations in Poland after the invasion in September 1939. They ran offices at both the Lodz and Warsaw ghettos to keep accurate counts of those to be exterminated. Every concentration camp maintained its own Abteilung, assigned with tracking inmates through the use of IBM's punch card record-keeping. IBM not only leased Nazi Germany the machines, but they provided continuous maintenance service and sold the spare parts and the special paper needed for the customized punch cards. Despite these facts, IBM responded by stating that there was no proof IBM had enabled the Holocaust. However, Sam Jaffe in Businessweek wrote, "With exhaustive research, author Edwin Black makes the case that IBM and Wannsee conspired with Nazi Germany to help automate the genocide of Europe's Jews. It seems that the administration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and see our videos on him, was not only aware of all of this activity, but he actually prevented any repercussions against the companies and their executives during the war. This amazing failure to acknowledge or hold these companies accountable is inexplicable, since all of these companies tried to recoup money they felt that they were entitled to during the war. Many of these corporate tycoons had been very financially supportive of FDR's various presidential campaigns, and he was just repaying the favors. In the United States, the concept of eugenics was widely accepted as a natural method for maintaining a healthy population. The mentally ill and criminals were subjected to sterilizations and experiments. A prime example were the Tuskegee syphilis experiments against Black Americans. In the United States, Jim Crow laws legalized racial segregation against blacks and American Indians, so the Germans saw no problem with their American relationship by imposing such laws against Jews under the 1935 Nuremberg laws. Apparently, the U.S. had no problem with this program either, hence the business contracts. Like in the U.S., Germany had a special handling of their less than desirable people. But unlike in America, the T4 euthanasia program focused upon killing the mentally challenged, Jews, even children who were considered incompatible with the Nazi eugenics policy of protecting German blood and German honor as stipulated in the Nuremberg laws. The relationship between the Catholic Church and the Nazis did have its problems. It started out well after Hitler was appointed chancellor in January 1933. However, the breakdown in that relationship started in 1936 and pretty much ended with many Catholic priests being placed in the new concentration camps. But only through the intervention of Pope Pius XI did that euthanasia program stop, at least publicly after the Concordat was signed. On eugenics and the influence upon German policy, see our video on Margaret Sanger. Pope Pius XI hoped that the Concordat would allow the Catholic Church in Germany to operate free from any interference. But this was not to be the case. concentration camps were already a part of the German program, with Dachau near Munich being the first, established in 1933 as a re-education camp for political and social prisoners. It was also the first slave labor camp, primarily for Germans, Gentiles, communists, Jews, and common criminals in general. But well over 100 more such camps would be constructed, many as supplemental slave labor camps. But 5 camps would be built for the sole purpose of mass murder. But it was an evolutionary process that was recorded by IBM. On January 20th, 1942, a meeting was held in the Wannsee district of Berlin, where a meeting of 15 high-ranking members of the SS, SA, and government convened under the direction of SS Lieutenant General Reinhard Heydrich and his assistant, Captain Adolf Eichmann. This 2-hour meeting was well documented in the 2000 HBO film Conspiracy, starring Stanley Tucci and Kenneth Branagh, and it is worth watching. Their primary focus were the 2.5 million Jews in the general government of occupied Poland under SS General Hans Frank and Secretary of State Joseph Bühler. The Jews had been placed into ghettos in the major cities, separated from the rest of Polish society, which were overcrowded, diseases broke out, and using German soldiers as a security force reduced manpower for the war against Stalin. These men were there to discuss and be informed of the new program of exterminating the Jews of Europe authorized by Adolf Hitler and managed by Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler. Of top interest was the use of poison gas and how it would be more efficient in the killing. Previously, these murders were conducted by the Einsatzgruppen and Order Police in Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and then moving into the Soviet Union. They were mobile killing units that followed the army's advance and entered towns, rounded up Jews primarily, and shot them. The victims were men, women, and children who were buried in deep mass graves such as at Babi Yar in Ukraine, where 33,771 people were killed in September 1941 alone. It was the largest mass grave in history. Then there was another development to accelerate the mass murders. Buses and vans were converted into mobile gas chambers, the exhaust redirected into the vehicles, which were packed with people. Carbon monoxide did the rest. But these methods were considered slow, crude, and inefficient. The 4 Einsatzgruppen commanders reported that many of their men were becoming morally debilitated by doing this kind of work. Killing unarmed people, especially women and children, was not something many of the soldiers could manage. Alcoholism rates skyrocketed and morale plummeted, and there were even desertions. In all the occupied regions, local non-Jews were instead recruited to assist and help in the killing to offset the damage to Germans and enhance that killing process. One German physician, Wilhelm Gustav Scheuppe, testified after his capture that his SS unit had killed over 100,000 people between September 1941 and March 1943, keeping accurate records courtesy of IBM. Estimates were that around 1 million people had been killed this way from 1939 to the end of 1941. According to official records and the interviews with SS Lieutenant General Karl Wolff and SA General Gerhard Klopfer, Heinrich Himmler had issued his top-secret order. These operations were not to be discussed. Every man involved, regardless of rank or branch of service, SS, Army, or police, was sworn to secrecy under penalty of court-martial. The reason was twofold. First, any advanced knowledge of the killings would reach other target populations which needed to be taken by surprise, cajoled into accepting relocation, especially in clearing ghettos, without them having any knowledge of their pending fates. The other reason was that, despite many Germans and Austrians being anti-Semitic to some degree, like many other Europeans, the leadership of the Third Reich were not willing to expose their populations to open mass murder as a matter of policy. It was well known that every German knew his good Jew, and many were friends and some had even married into their families. The people were only informed that Jews were being relocated east for work. According to Karl Wolff, Hitler had said that removing the undesirables, to include Slavs, Jews, and others, was our noble cause. Himmler said the same thing. But allowing that to be an open policy known to all would not benefit the effort. He knew that many Germans would find such an act appalling, which Himmler agreed with. That was why the order was issued to maintain secrecy, but things did have a way of getting out. Heydrich and Eichmann held the meeting to inform all of the regional commanders that there was a new method that had been tried and proven effective: gas chambers. 2 camps had been constructed at Belzec and Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1941, where testing was done. This was where Rockefeller and IBM come into play. Rockefeller was an investor in chemicals through IG Farben and Bayer, which included the pre-war development of the insecticide Zyklon B, which would become the preferred manner of extermination in the gas chambers because it was very cheap and very efficient. Watson IBM Systems automated the categorization and counting process of shipments of all chemicals, as the SS was a real stickler on accuracy, including using the system to keep the trains running into the camps on time, loaded with victims, and on schedule. Auschwitz would be the largest of all camps, providing slave labor for dozens of German industry, such as IG Farben and other war manufacturing businesses, and also supplying human subjects designated for medical experiments, while the Birkenau complex next door would simply kill those unfit for labor. See our video on Dr. Joseph Mengele on this subject. And IBM machines kept those records. According to Gerhard Klopfer, once we heard about the establishment of these special camps, meaning death camps, I think all of us sitting there were somewhat shocked at the reports we were hearing. Eichmann explained it. I, for one, was not quite believing what I was hearing, and others at the table were somewhat visibly unnerved. But this came from the Fuhrer, and it was also signed by Reich Marshal Hermann Göring. Due to the success of the testing and pressure from Berlin in 1942, aside from Auschwitz-Birkenau, which served a dual purpose, 5 dedicated killing centers were created at Belzec, Treblinka, Chelmno, Sobibor, and Majdanek. These locations would have trainloads of victims arrive, but these were not holding areas for slave laborers. Most of these people would be killed within a matter of hours after arrival. According to Mark Roseman, in this respect, the Wannsee Protocol captured a decisive transition in German policy, a transition from murderous deportations to a clear program of murder. The only people allowed to live, at least for a while, were the Sonderkommandos, prisoners who would handle the corpses of those gassed. One of these was Rudolf Rieder, who arrived at Belzec in August 1942 when he was 61 years old. Rieder was chosen to work instead of being killed right away. He was assigned to a Sonderkommando moving bodies from the gas chambers to mass graves. Powerless to intervene, he said, "I heard the door shut. I heard their screams and cries. I was haunted by the terrible things I saw, hearing the cries of the murdered and the children weeping." Belzec was one of 5 dedicated death camps which the Nazis started building in 1941, and by 1942 was fully running as a death camp. Sobibor, Treblinka, and Majdanek then followed. Soon all had their crematoria. Rieder had been there for almost 4 months when, in November 1942, while being taken outside the camp to collect sheet metal, he managed to escape. He survived the rest of the Holocaust by hiding. Out of 434,500 Jews sent to die in Belzec, only Rudolf Rieder and 1 other person survived. IBM recorded it all. When it came to the Holocaust and chemical production, Rockefeller's company was a willing partner, as a full partner and investor. In a board meeting on April 14, 1941 in Ludwigshafen, Otto Armbrust, the IG Farben board member responsible for the Auschwitz project, because they owned Auschwitz, stated to his board colleagues, "Our new friendship with the SS is a blessing. We have determined all measures integrating the concentration camps to benefit our company." It should be noted that Auschwitz was the largest mass extermination factory in human history. However, few people are aware that Auschwitz was 100% a subsidiary of IG Farben. So, what role did IBM play in the Holocaust? Every trainload of victims was offloaded and processed upon arrival. At the concentration camps, where people were not to be killed right away, each prisoner was assigned a number, which was tattooed on their forearm. This was to maintain accountability. If a prisoner died, their number was unregistered and tabulated, keeping an accurate count, which was critical. Himmler liked progress reports, and he was impressed with those camp commandants who killed the most people the quickest. Another program was the forced kidnapping of young children all over Europe, especially in Eastern Europe. If the child looked Aryan, then they were sent to Germany or Austria to be raised in a special orphanage, but sometimes they were adopted by German families. Usually, the parents were either already dead or headed to a camp for special treatment. These children were also counted and tabulated using IBM punch cards. As far as war industry was concerned, Hitler had an insatiable appetite for knowing the exact numbers of production, from tanks, ships, U-boats, aircraft, rifles, helmets, machine guns, and bullets. Keeping count of all of this were the tabulation machines of IBM, which maintained its operational subsidiary, as did Rockefeller, Coca-Cola, Ford, GM, and other companies, which after the war wanted to recoup any profits those companies had made. Ford and GM actually came to terms with the Holocaust in varying degrees, and see our video on that, but there was not any real punishment. Holocaust survivors filed lawsuits against all the companies, German and American, with Ford and GM coming to agreements, which is in our video on that subject. So, in the end, were American companies actively complicit in the Holocaust and aiding an enemy of the United States in a time of war? Or were they just companies whose subsidiaries were carrying on business without the proper permissions and patents being applied that aided the German war effort? Were their managers war criminals? We will let you decide. And thanks again to Heroes of History for supporting today's episode. Give Heroes of History a try. It's completely free. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen, and I'll also pin it in the comments for easy access. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.